Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2021 National TANF State Directors Meeting. TANF Rising to the Challenge, COVID, Economic Security, and Social Change. My name is Lisa Washington Thomas, and I'm the Director of Self-Sufficiency TA at the Office of Family Assistance. And I would like to personally thank you all for attending our first ever nationwide virtual gathering of TANF leaders, practitioners, policymakers, and self-sufficiency achievement. Your hard work and dedication is helping families achieve self-sufficiency is both essential and inspiring. And your engagement during this meeting, you and your peers over the next 4 days will both celebrate your successes and provide opportunities to learn new strategies and practices to continue to effectively serve our customers. The plus side of a virtual meeting is that you can tune in from your comfortable seat in your home office or in your kitchen, surrounded by your favorite beverages and snacks. But please don't forget to charge your device and get ready to use that webcam this week. This meeting is organized around 5 themes that were selected to capture information across all areas related to TANF: self-sufficiency, employment, program administration, and family success. The themes are work activities and service innovations, data dynamics, COVID, number 4 is racial equity in TANF programs, and number 5 is support for reopening. You will also see a 6th icon for those programs that were created with the help of and advice from Tribal TANF and new directors. You will notice the colorful symbols on the agenda next to the workshop names throughout the week. All of our sessions align with at least one of these themes and are coded to help you decide which sessions are most relevant to your work. In honor of the 25th anniversary of TANF's authorization, which was officially marked in August, we will today hear from experts as they reflect on the evolution and look to the future and potential of the TANF program. Throughout the week, you will have the opportunity to hear from many exciting speakers, including several current and former customers that have engaged with various TANF programs. They have each overcome difficult circumstances on their journey toward economic stability, and their lived experiences provide critically important expertise to improve TANF program service offerings. In addition to workshops and sessions and plenaries, there will be peer exchanges and time with OFA leadership. Also, although this is a virtual meeting, we have been intentional about providing several opportunities for you to connect and network with your peers. There is a community page, which I like to think of as the hallway of the meeting. There's a community page on the meeting website where you can browse the profiles of your fellow attendees and send them messages. Now, caution, Visible will alert you when someone has viewed your profile. If the alert messages become overwhelming, you can turn off your notifications under Settings in the upper right-hand corner of the screen and select the drop-down box where you will find Settings. Choose that, and then you can choose your to turn them on or turn them off. If you haven't already, please visit the page and update your profile with a picture, bio, and what you wish to get out of the meeting. We're also incorporating brain dates during this meeting, which are one-on-one or small group discussions on topics created and posted by you. You can participate in and schedule brain dates with colleagues to dive deeper into what interests you most. A time for online learning amongst each other. There are concierges there to guide you through the process. To learn more, check out the meeting's brain date page. Additionally, please be sure to visit our official meeting photo booth. You can take photos and add them to our meeting photo gallery. You can even create avatars of yourself for others to use so we can take group photos in the comfort of your own homes or offices. And again, remember, we have concierges to help you. And for those of you who have Apple Watches or Fitbit and are a little bit more competitive, we're keeping track of we ask you to keep track of a meeting leaderboard. Each person will receive points for attending sessions. Participating in network activities, visiting our virtual hall, which features 7 exhibits, including the chance for you to vote on the new look of the OSA Pure TA site. And the winner of the leaderboard, you get bragging rights, just like you do with your Apple Watch badges or your Fitbit badges. It's all in fun. There are no awards, there are no demerits, just fun and a fun way to compete. And as you decide which of today's 5 concurrent workshops and 8 peer engagement discussions you wish to attend, remember that you can create a customized agenda by clicking on the star icon next to the names of the sessions of your choice on our meeting agenda page. Your selections will appear under My Interest tab. If you're having a hard time deciding, all the workshops will be recorded, so you'll be able to watch the sessions you don't want to attend at a later time. Thank you so much for your patience and listening to all those instructions. So please remember concierge or the help button. Now I would like to introduce to you Will Martin. Will Martin is a 477 Division Director with the Central Council Tlingit and Haida Indian Tribes of Alaska. And Will lead us in an opening prayer. We'll be followed by Holly Morales, who is the Senior Director of the Employment and Training Services at Cook Inlet Tribal Council. And Holly will be providing welcoming remarks. Some of you may know or may not know, there is a 477 conference happening exactly at the same time. And we wanted to show our partnership and collaboration with our 477 partners. And we are so thankful that they were able to come and help us open this meeting. Thank you so much, Will and Holly, and I'll turn this over to Will.
Thank you, and good morning from Alaska. I'm very honored and humbled to have been asked to do this. As was introduced, my name is Will Martin. I was born and raised here in Southeast Alaska, and one way or the other, I found myself in this trade. So I've been doing public assistance type of works since 2000, and it has provided a lot of gratification knowing that so many lives have been changed. So I am a Christian, so I will be providing a Christian prayer. So let us pray. Our gracious Heavenly Father, we love you so very much, and we thank you for the health you provide to us. We thank you, Lord, for the provisions that you provide for us. We thank you, Lord, for all things. I thank you, Lord, for so many people that have a love, and compassion, and kindness for the disadvantaged. And we have come together this week, Lord, to learn new things, to gather new tools, to help us, Lord, in our efforts to assist families reach their highest potential and become self-sufficient. I pray, Lord, that you would open our hearts, open our minds, open our spirits, help us to receive the wisdom and knowledge that you have for us so that we can be better at the jobs that you have called us to do. I pray, Lord, that you help us all to have enjoyment this week. Help us, Lord, to laugh, help us to cry when necessary. And Lord, just help us to just join together and be in unity as we go through these, all these things that we're going to be going through this week. We praise and worship you for all of this in Jesus' wonderful and powerful name. Amen.
Thank you, Will. And we'll turn it over to Holly.
Thank you very much. Good morning and good afternoon. I'm honored to welcome you to the 2021 National TANF Directors Meeting. As they stated, my name is Holly Morales. I'm an enrolled tribal member of Stebbins Tribe in the Alaska Bering Straits region. I work at Cook Inlet Tribal Council as Senior Director, and we are located in Anchorage, Alaska. I'm also the co-chair of the Public Law 102-477 Tribal Work Group. As CITC is a 477 tribal organization and our TANF program is under our 477 plan. We know the past year and a half has been a challenge due to the pandemic. I know we definitely had to shift gears, not only to learn how to provide work remotely, but also learning very quickly how to provide much needed services to our people who in this time needed our help more than ever. From delivering groceries to families that had to quarantine because they had COVID, to providing virtual classes to participants and assistance to their children that had to attend school virtually. I know that all of you have done a tremendous job this past year and probably had to step up. And when you yourself had been fearful of the unknown, the COVID virus. What I've learned over the past year is we are all called to do this job. And when we have difficult times, we face it head on to ensure that our people get the services needed. I want to thank you for your service to TANF families. The conference theme this year is TANF, Rising to the Challenge. And that is the perfect theme for what we have done this past year, Rise to the Challenge. I look forward to learning more this week on how we can serve families during this very difficult time. I also want to mention there will be 477 BI staff attending some of the workshops. And if you want to learn more about this essential tool for 4 tribes to serve families with more flexibility, please reach out to them or myself. Again, I want to thank you for all that you do for your people. Stay safe and God bless. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Holly. Thank you, Will. I now have the pleasure of introducing our Acting Director of the Office of Family Assistance, Susan Galanka. Susan has a vast knowledge and expertise and experience working with social services programs, especially TANF. She has extensive, long experience at the National Governors Association before joining the Office of Family Assistance as the Deputy Director. And we are very pleased that during this transition, she is our Acting Director leading us to the new level of TANF. So I turn this over to you, Susan.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you everyone as well who's joined us today. Thank you, Holly and Will for the opening, helping us get started here today. As Lisa said, my name is Susan Galanka. I'm the Acting Director of the Office of Family Assistance, and I'm just really thrilled that we have states, territory, and tribal TANF leaders and staff with us today as we both learn and share throughout this week. And I want to thank all of our stakeholders as well, policy experts, researchers, practitioners, and providers who will also be joining us in participating and sharing their knowledge. As Holly mentioned, so much has changed and so much has happened since last time we met, which was in person in 2019. It truly boggles the mind. I'm going to really leave my other remarks to after we hear our true opening speaker and highlight of this welcome. And that is, I want to welcome Acting Assistant Secretary Chang, who has joined us. And you can imagine all that's going on within ACF right now with the Afghan refugees coming and unaccompanied minors and the reconciliation bill. And she is a very busy lady. So we appreciate her taking the time today. The Acting Assistant Secretary, Chang is the Acting Assistant Secretary. She's also the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Administration for Children and Families. She joined the Biden administration in February of 2021 after serving as a Senior Deputy Director at the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, where she oversaw the child welfare system. Prior to her work in Michigan state government, Acting Assistant Secretary Chang served as a managing director at Casey Family Programs, the nation's largest operating foundation focused on improving the child welfare system. I think that's when we first met. And she has led work to identify, develop, and disseminate information about the most promising practices in child welfare. She is also no stranger to ACF. Under the Obama administration, Acting Assistant Secretary Chang served as the head of the Children's Bureau, which was, by the way, the first federal agency to focus exclusively on improving the lives of children and families. There, she would Well, when there, she administered more than $7 billion in federal programming to support national child protection, foster care, guardianship, and adoption programs. I know you will appreciate, as I do, the passion that Acting Assistant Secretary Chang brings to her position and her heartfelt commitment to promoting the economic security and well-being of America's children and families. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Susan, for that very kind introduction. Wonderful to be with all of you. And I'm really honored to welcome each and every one of you to the 2021 National TANF Directors Meeting. I was reflecting on the title of this year's conference, which is TANF Rising to the Challenge, COVID, Economic Security, and Social Change. I think it really reminds us that TANF must rise to the challenge of the moment. And rising to the challenge, I think, is an appropriate title for TANF leaders, not only because of the challenging times we live in, but because of the work that we do and the people we serve. Many of our clients, many of your clients, find themselves struggling with challenges that few of us can probably imagine. Perhaps a childhood of abuse or neglect, historical trauma, generational violence and poverty, and centuries of racist policies. And yet our work as TANF leaders inherently asks them to overcome such challenges, to seek and acquire work, to help support their families and community health. And we as leaders who have been entrusted to help take on these monumental challenges that we face today can do no less, right? And there are a few ways in which this moment right now is so pivotal for each and every one of you to step up as leaders to take on those challenges. First and foremost, we must continue to support low-income families as they recover from the pandemic, along with all of us. We need to consider what the dramatic shifts in the economy and work precipitated by the pandemic mean for the families we are trying to help. Some of the questions we ask ourselves are, how can we prepare them for and connect them to emerging opportunities? Second, I hope that we can use the recent 25th anniversary of TANF to assess what's working and what's not in our safety net services and work programs. Some of the questions we ask ourselves here is, why are less than 25% of eligible families receiving TANF today? And why is it that only 6% of the hours counted toward the work requirement is in education or training? Lastly, the Biden-Harris administration is ready to take on these challenges with you and to work with each of you to incorporate what we see as key principles that really have to infuse all of our human services work right now, especially in the areas of equity and the focus on the well-being of the whole family, right? Not just the component parts that we may see in our offices. Using a race equity lens, some of the questions we ask ourselves is, how can we improve the TANF program, both policies and practices, so that every family with their unique needs, their unique strengths, and their capacity receives the support they need to live to their full potential. These are the challenges that we must work on together and with a shared commitment and focus. As we come together to address these challenges, let me first acknowledge our appreciation as an administration, as an ACF office, for how aggressively and rapidly your TANF programs responded to the changing context of the pandemic. I want to just personally thank you and each and every one of your teams for the incredibly hard work and sometimes invisible work and resilience that you showed during this stressful time. We saw programs across the country adapt to provide virtual case management, new flexibilities and approaches to work programs, and increase benefit amounts to help some of the most challenged families weather this challenging storm. And while we recognize the extraordinary effort from your programs and your staff, we are doing the audacious thing of asking you to dig deeper, asking yourselves, what else can your TANF funds be doing to strategically reduce family poverty, alleviate economic crises, and respond to the emergency needs in your states, tribes, and communities? I look forward to hearing these conversations spark up as we come together this week to learn from one another and to mark and honor the 25th anniversary of the program. I provided some ideas for using TANF to improve economic mobility in the Dear Colleague letter that we sent out last week. And we know that there are many more examples of TANF innovation and strategic thinking out there. And we want to hear that. We want you to share that with each other and harness that creativity here at this conference. We also acknowledge that TANF is just one piece of a much larger puzzle we need to support the families in our communities who struggle most. We at ACF have been working diligently to disperse the unprecedented $47.5 billion in the American Rescue Plan funds that we received. These funds, including support for childcare and early learning, home energy and water assistance, and of course, the Pandemic Emergency Assistance Fund, represent the largest infusion of federal resources for families in 60 years. Together, they provide a comprehensive approach to transform the way we think about and support children and families and address system inequalities. You'll hear more on Thursday from leaders across ACF about efforts to fully harness these available resources and create real and positive, lasting changes for Americans most in need of emergency relief. You're also going to hear a lot this week about one of our core values here at ACF, and that is the vital importance of ensuring an equitable economic recovery. Following President Biden's leadership, ACF has a clear goal to build a more just and equitable nation with systems that treat everyone the way that we want to be treated, right? That is with fairness, dignity, and respect. We know that TANF hasn't always served families of color and other marginalized groups well. We now, as a group of leaders, have an opportunity to redress such inequities, but it requires that we re-examine our policies and invest in efforts specifically targeted to support and increase the self-sufficiency of underserved communities. Many of you are doing that work right now, and we really look forward to learning more together. We know that transformational work happens, not here in Washington, D.C., but with you at the state and local tribal level. ACF is committed to supporting you as you work to administer and improve your TANF programs. This week and beyond, we want to be here to help clarify policies and flexibilities, provide opportunities for you to learn from others in the field, including your peers and those with lived experience, and inspire you, we hope, to think in new and collaborative ways to support the families you already serve. We share a common goal of improving the overall well-being of families by helping them address economic stability needs and obtain the jobs and resources to maintain healthy and stable homes. Thank you so much for your partnership, and we look forward to a great conference. Thanks so much. I'll turn it back to Susan.
Well, thank you, Acting Assistant Secretary. I think those words were heartfelt and inspirational. And I also feel we have a charge as we go forward this week and learn from each other and think about new partnerships, new ideas, and how we can do even better for our families. So thank you so much. So our first panel is going to be really wonderful. You know, as has been noted, TANF was signed into law 25 years ago. And while it wasn't exactly the sort of occasion that people ask, what were you doing when? It certainly was a seminal event one that redefined the idea of a safety net and our nation's responsibility, or our nation's response to poverty. An event whose impact has been unspooling for over 25 years. Recently, the Children's Defense Fund issued a publication entitled TANF at 25, Reflection and Reckoning. And we have been doing a lot of that lately at OFA, indeed over many years. And as the Acting Assistant Secretary did, I want to recognize the efforts and achievements that each of you have made in your programs to deliver assistance and services to families in need. Your creativity and innovation, and particularly during the pandemic. The programmatic and policy changes that you made demonstrated that bureaucracies can adapt and respond quickly, which is not what people usually think. But we also know that TANF could be doing much more for our families. We have fewer than 25% of eligible families receiving TANF. We have 17 states that have not increased their benefit levels since 1996. And if we look about the national average of the maximum income for initial eligibility for TANF, it's about $908 per month for a family of 3. In other words, a family with an annual income above $11,000 or just at 52% of the poverty level would not have qualified to receive TANF. So we do have some thinking to do, and where do we go from here? But I do think I feel inspired by what has transpired lately. I feel that we're in a situation now where circumstances have, if you will, converged to suggest that now is the time to make changes, to reflect, to rethink at every level, national, state, tribal, local, of how we can serve families better and what it means to do so in today's world. So our next 2 speakers are really going to help us do this as we think about how do we take this moment where we're recovering or still, both in the midst of the pandemic and starting to recover. We've seen tremendous changes in the workforce, in the economy, in the demands of the labor market. And at the national level, a real reckoning around the racial issues that have really infused our society, and more to our specific focus right now have been part of the policies that have been developed over time that really have been embedded in a sort of historic racism. So all those factors converging really mean this is a great time to take accounting and to think about where we want to go from here. And to do that this afternoon, well, in Washington anyways, this afternoon, we have 2 folks that are really some of my favorite people to ever call upon. And I talk about them in that they both share sort of a similar superpower. So we're first going to hear from Dr. Donna Pavetti, who works for the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. And she has this wonderful ability to translate research into policy and practice in clear and pragmatic ways. And similarly, Professor Harry Holzer is an academic through and through, and a policy wonk as well. But he similarly is able to take complex economic ideas and translate them into concrete policy proposals and communicate these ideas in a way that non-economists and policymakers can understand and connect to. A little more background about each of them. Dr. LaDonna Pavetti, who will help us rethink TANF as a safety net program. How does it fit into the larger picture of safety net programs? And what did we learn from the pandemic about where it suggests we might go? Dr. Pavetti is Vice President for Family Income Support Policy at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. In this capacity, she oversees the center's work analyzing poverty trends and assessing the nation's income support programs. Including TANF. And for the last several years, she has been working on a special initiative to identify opportunities to build executive function and self-regulation skills in TANF and other work programs. And some of her most recent work has focused on race equity in TANF, and she's been author to several recent publications. One, Cash Assistance Should Promote Equity, and another, TANF Policies Reflect Racist Legacy of Cash Assistance. And our second speaker, as I mentioned, Professor Harry Holzer, he was going to help us understand the changing nature of the economy and the workforce, largely precipitated by the pandemic, and what that means for increasing the effectiveness of TANF as a work preparation program. Harry is a John Lafarge Jr. S.J. Professor of Public Policy at Georgetown University, McCourt School of Public Policy. He's also a non-resident senior fellow at Brookings and an institute fellow at the American Institute for Research in Washington, D.C. He's been a former chief economist for the U.S. Department of Labor and was founding faculty director of the Georgetown Center on Poverty and Inequality. He's currently on sabbatical with the Russell Sage Foundation. And Professor Holzer is recognized as a national expert on the low-wage labor market and has particularly studied the problems of minority workers in urban areas. He has authored over 12 books and several dozen journal articles. And he has, like any good academic, he has many publications, research, awards, and appointments. They're all very extensive. But I think his remarks will just convince you that he is a good person to listen to at this point in time. So welcome both Donna and Harry. And today, each of them will make some short remarks, and then we will have a conversation. Folks can enter their questions or comments into the Q&A function, and we will further the conversation in that way. So thank you both for joining us today. And Donna, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for those kind remarks, Susan, and thanks all of you for being here and participating in the conference and the discussion. And I will say, you know, I spend a lot of my time sort of pointing out TANF's flaws, and I think there are many. But in spite of that, I think we are really at a rare moment where we can really think about how do we take a step back, think about what we've learned, and how do we really think about how we can maximize TANF's effectiveness. And I really think for me, it feels like it's really a time to be bold and to take all that we've learned over the last 25 years and to really use that knowledge to help transform the lives of families who are struggling to make ends meet. And I'd just like to start with just some of the things are my main takeaways when I think about over the last 25 years. And I really have been doing research and been involved in TANF policy for all of those 25 years and AFDC before that. So besides that, just sort of indicating that I'm aging, it is also sort of gives you some sense of just sort of the depth of my sort of involvement in this issue. So one thing I think that is really important and I think is unique about TANF is that we really have learned a lot in the last 25 years about the important role that cash income plays in the lives of families and children. And that we didn't have that research 25 years ago. So we know that it not only matters to help families meet their basic needs now, but it also matters a lot for children's futures. We know that when we have more income for kids, they do better in school, and it also even into adulthood changes, and also really has a huge impact on their health outcomes. So we just know that cash really matters. And I think that is a really important part of thinking about what we do about TANF. We've also learned that we can implement employment programs that have long-lasting impacts on parents' employment and earnings, and I think much greater impacts than the research we had when TANF started. And one example of that is the recent evaluation of Project Quest in San Antonio, which at 11 years shows that there are just significant increases in families' earnings, enough that it really moves them into the middle class. So we don't have a lot of those examples, but I think we have some examples that really demonstrate that if we're willing to invest, we can make a big difference in people's lives and not just a small difference. But I also think that we have learned that some of our policies have negative impacts on Blacks than on whites. For example, we know from the research that Blacks are more likely to be sanctioned than whites. And we know when families are sanctioned that there is often a downward spiral that happens, that they don't have income. There is additional distress that happens, and there are poor outcomes for kids. So I think we need to really think hard about what that means. We also know that Blacks are likelier to live in states with the lowest benefits and the lowest levels of participation. I think we've also learned that time doesn't stand still. And I think we forget that sometimes. So you will often hear statistics about the benefits and the positive and the success of TANF. And much of that comes from TANF's first 4 years, when the economy was booming and we saw a huge increase in employment among single parents. But if you look over the whole 25 years, what you see is a big increase in those first 4 years, and then the line of participation takes a downward turn, and it stays pretty much on that downward trajectory. So I think we need to think about not what happened in TANF's first years, but where are we now? And what do we need to be thinking about? And what do we take from what we learned during those 25 years, but not sort of be stuck on sort of what we learned in those very first years, because I think we are in a different time. As people sort of mentioned, I think that we've also, in the last 18 months during the pandemic, we sort of learned new things about designing and delivering services. And I think probably we're doing things we never thought were possible. We never thought, I don't think, as much as we know now, how effective telehealth could be, or how effective it could be to deliver mental health services electronically. And so I think all of those are things that just should not only do we take those forward, but I think the other part of that is being bold and saying, let's rethink it all. Let's throw it out and think about how can we actually think about doing things differently and trying things that we may not have thought possible. And then also, I do think that what is really critical, and this is, as Susan mentioned, is a lot of the focus of my work, is thinking much more deeply about race and racism and how it manifests itself in the work that we do. And we can't deny how much racism is embedded in TANF. We have a long history of blaming people who are struggling for their own misfortunes, rather than acknowledging all the ways in which racism limits their opportunities and defines their futures. And I think that we really have to come to grips with, sort of how racism has played into where we are and what we can do to move in a different direction. So there's a few things that I think that we can do, sort of taking what we've learned about from those last 25 years and really sort of thinking about going forward and making some changes to TANF. First is, and Susan sort of mentioned this is increasing benefits to families so that families have a reasonable chance of meeting their basic needs. I've been working with Phil Fisher at the University of Oregon just in analyzing some of the data they've been collecting during the pandemic. And so what their data shows is that when you have higher levels of hardship, what happens is you end up with higher levels of stress among parents, and then that leads to more distress among kids. So you have this chain of events that really starts with hardship that really creates sort of the poor outcomes that we sometimes see in our families who are struggling. So to undo that, what you need to do is to reduce the hardship, and providing cash to families is a way of doing that. And we definitely have made progress in the last years. We have a number of states that have increased their TANF benefits, but we have a long way to go to actually do more there. I think the other is improving access by removing barriers to participation. If TANF served the same share of families that it did in 1996, we'd have 2 million more families who are receiving assistance. And we spend less on TANF cash payments, not because families are doing better, but because we have so few people in need who are actually accessing the program. So some things that we can do, I think, to begin to change that are shifting from a rule-based, punishment-oriented system to a program that really celebrates participant strengths acknowledges their limitations and affirms their dignity so that people want to come into the program and recognize that it is a place where they will get help rather than feeling like there's too much shame, there's too many hassles, it's not going to help them at all. So some examples of policies that I think we need to think about changing are eliminating the behavioral and exclusionary requirements, the family cap, which is very much rooted in racism, arbitrary time limits, which mean that families, even if they have needs, and we're talking about 25 years now, that a 5-year time limit, then you can accumulate that over 25 years. That really thinking about we should be basing it on need and not on arbitrary policies. Upfront work requirements that often are so onerous that people really can't even get onto the program. And then sanctions, which really take benefits away from people who often are the families that have the greatest challenges. We know from the research that mental health issues, low levels of education, and a lot of other family challenges are much more prevalent among families who are sanctioned. And then also, this goes back to something Susan mentioned about revisiting eligibility requirements. Many of those haven't been changed for many years and they're very low. And what we require is people go on a downward spiral, and when they hit the bottom, then they come on to TANF, and it's much harder to help them to really move back up and to get their lives back together. The other is, I think that one of the things, and I'm going to do a session on this later, is really thinking about how can we redesign work programs so that we can move them in an anti-racist direction. And I think there are several pieces of that. One is really we need to think about how can we focus much more on individual choice, really helping people to identify what their goals are, their aspirations, and what we can do to help them achieve that. The other is that we need to be focusing on promoting opportunity and supporting economic mobility rather than being stuck in a work first. We started with a belief that people had to be compelled to work, where we get, sort of the work first as well as the sanctions. But if you look at the research, there's a high level of work before people come on to TANF and after. And so what we're doing is we're just sort of pushing people back into the same jobs that led them to TANF in the first place. And that is also just sort of upholding the occupational segregation that we have had going on for years. So really changing our frame to say, how can we have families move to a better place when they leave for the long term, really sort of building on some of that research about what we know about how to implement effective programs and really changing those trajectories. And then how can we provide the resources and supports to maximize success? We know that when parents go into community college or go into training programs, they often hit roadblocks. Those same challenges that they have of just making ends meet derail them, and really thinking about how can we use TANF as a way to really sort of build some of those supports and really maximizing their success. And then I think there is a huge opportunity, depending on where we end up with the reconciliation bill, of really thinking as we have new investments in families that really are intended to help families, really what's the most effective way of using the TANF resources, given what the others are there. So what's the role of TANF if we have universal pre-K and we have an entitlement to childcare? What's the role of TANF if we have free community college? What's the role of TANF if we have significant new workforce investments, or if we have if we have a lot of infrastructure jobs, or we have a lot of climate change jobs? Where does TANF really sort of fit into that? And where are the ways in which TANF agencies can maximize those opportunities and those new resources for TANF families, as well as for other families who have low income, very low incomes who may not be on TANF? How do we maximize the value of the child tax credit? I think that the combination of the child tax credit and TANF is an incredibly powerful beginning point, that it will, the two of those together can reduce hardship and provide up the foundation that allow families to really take advantage of some of the workforce opportunities. So I think we just need to think about how do we really sort of, again, maximize that. And then my last point is, I think we really need to do some work about the narrative and our narrative about why people turn to TANF. And I think that we often think about the struggles or the failures that lead families to TANF, and we don't recognize as clearly the structural racism, how it constrains people's choices, where people live, and the other challenges they face really constrain them, and what the labor market offers versus doesn't. We know that people who have a criminal record face incredible challenges. If you look at the rates of employment among people with mental health issues, they are extremely low. People with any sorts of disabilities, and that's not, we don't really sort of think about what are the labor market issues that are causing that. And then the other is how can we recognize the diversity of the caseload, recognizing that some people just are there for a short period of time and other people have much greater needs, and really thinking much more strategically about building out that for all of those, all of the people who are there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Harry, who's going to sort of focus much more on sort of the labor market and sort of the issues we face. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Donna, for your very perceptive remarks, as always. Thank you to Susan and the entire HHS team for including me today and helping me participate. I want to really focus on the labor market and what's going on there and what's likely to change. And I'll focus on 3 topics. The first one will simply be COVID. We are recovering from the COVID recession. We have mostly recovered, but there will be some lasting effects that we want to think about. Secondly, what else will be going on in the labor market? What other changes over the next 5, 10, 20 years that we want TANF to anticipate and get ready for? And then thirdly, what policy changes at the federal level will be coming down the road? We will likely have some major policy changes, as Donna pointed out, over the next 3 months. Some involve education and training, skill building for workers. There's a bucket of other policies as well. What will those look like and how can we get ready for them? So let me first start with COVID. Now, we all know that COVID, this particular recession driven by COVID, hit low-income workers, less educated workers, workers of color, and women much harder than the usual recession does because it was so focused on the service part of the economy. And again, there has been some substantial recovery for the entire labor market and for all those groups, but certain lasting effects are there. First, I want to point out the many workers that permanently lost the jobs that they had before, and also those more broadly suffering from long-term unemployment, 6 months, a year or more. And by the way, those 2 categories largely overlap, but not completely. At the worst time in the COVID pandemic, we had about 4 million workers in each of those categories. And again, once you've been out a long time, once you've permanently lost a job, it is harder to come back in and find something else. Now those numbers look a little better, 2.5 to 3 million workers permanently let go or long-term unemployed. Presumably that drop off of 1 million to 1.5 million workers. Some of them got jobs. I fear that a lot of them simply left the labor force. And once again, for people who leave the labor force for whatever issue, especially moms doing a lot of childcare, it is more challenging often to bring them back in. We know there have been other changes more on the employer side of the labor market, what economists call the demand side. We know that in both retail trade and in hospitality, there's been a big shift away from brick and mortar, away from in-establishment dining services, and a lot more online and delivery. That will affect people who had those jobs in those areas. We also know, for instance, that remote work grew a lot and will likely remain at elevated levels. That means, for instance, a lot of low-wage workers working in the downtown lunch service. Many of those jobs will be gone and not be coming back. Now, in each of these cases, there are new jobs and new businesses, but the new jobs, the new businesses may be in different locations. The new jobs may need a different skill set. So workers, especially disadvantaged workers, are going to need some real assistance to help adjust to this new labor market. And let me mention quickly one change that nobody anticipated, certainly not many economists like me. There seems to be a growing choosiness of workers about what kinds of jobs to take and a lower willingness to accept certain negative characteristics of the jobs people had before. Some people want, and you see this, by the way, you see it in the very high job vacancy rates. Job vacancy rates are higher than unemployment rates right now, and that's pretty unusual. Quit rates have been very high, even among people who kept their jobs. Some people want simply better pay and benefits. Some people want some kind of an upward career trajectory. Some people simply want a more stable schedule so they know when they can be with their families. It might well be that the TANF population, those folks don't necessarily have the luxury of being more demanding and waiting for job improvements, but they might still be affected indirectly and assisted, because whenever employers have trouble finding the workers they need, whenever the labor market is tighter, that usually puts pressure on them to raise wages and benefits and even to provide more training. And that's almost always a good thing for workers. So I'm actually quite pleased to see this, the people who can afford to remain a little choosier, to put that pressure on employers to be more forthcoming. Now let me shift to my second topic. What other trends are going on? As I said, both over the next 5, 10, 20 years, I'll mention 3 of them very briefly. On the demand side, on the employer side of the labor market, automation. On the supply side, the worker side of the market, besides the growing choosiness, the baby boomers are retiring. And in fact, some of the people who left the labor force because of COVID were retiring baby boomers. And thirdly, kinds of institutional changes on the nature of work. People talk a lot about the gig economy, but also the fact of employers outsourcing employment to other companies. What do all those things mean? So again, very briefly, automation has been accelerated by COVID. It will continue to have major effects. Automation isn't all negative, by the way. It does raise people's standards of living, and it does create many new jobs, sometimes that pay better than the old jobs. But there is job displacement, and it will occur. And some of it will affect the populations we're talking about. Robotics and other artificial intelligence developments. For instance, we'll see more robots in these fulfillment centers like Amazon that have created a lot of new jobs. If and when autonomous vehicles ever take off, and they will, it'll probably take more time than a lot of people anticipated, that will eliminate a lot of transportation jobs that are lower wage workers needed. So we have to anticipate those kinds of displacements, and how can we help those displaced workers more than we do right now to get newer skills and help them find newer and hopefully better jobs. Now, the baby boomer retirements, I think, are a more positive thing for people. It has some negative implications for the federal budgets and things like that we've never seriously addressed. But I think it will contribute to a tightening labor market. And as I said, that's always a good thing for the workers there, especially lower wage workers. And what about the changing nature of work, the gig economy, et cetera? I always thought the gig economy stuff was a little overhyped. It really amounted to only about 1% of all workers before the pandemic. Now, because the pandemic increased a lot of the sort of the online delivery activities, I think the gig level of jobs will grow, and some of that's quite positive. A lot of workers love the flexibility, the informality of gig type employment, but it'll be something to watch. I actually have more concern about this other development that we talk about a lot less. That's a lot of employers, especially larger employers, outsourcing all of their human resource functions to these companies that specialize in that. But frankly, these companies often have very little commitment to the workers whom they employ, very little commitment to training them or improving their access to benefits. Some people call that fissuring. Under one roof, many different people are responsible, many different companies for employment functions. We don't have a lot of data on that, and we haven't done a lot of research to see how big that phenomenon is, whether it's negative or positive, but definitely something to keep our eye on and to anticipate. Well, let me now turn to the third issue, maybe the most interesting issue, policy changes, and policy changes that are likely to come down from the federal level before the end of this calendar year. Now, of course, we have 2 bills which the Biden administration is pushing. There's the $1 trillion bill, the infrastructure bill that will be bipartisan. Interestingly, there's nothing for workers in that bill, next to nothing for workers in that bill, even though it will create more demand for workers in construction and some parts of manufacturing, et cetera. So it's a little unfortunate that none of that money went to making sure there's skilled workers to meet that growing demand. If major changes are to occur, they will need to be in the reconciliation bill that only Democrats are pushing for, what a lot of people call the $3.5 trillion bill. Of course, it will likely not be 3.5 trillion. Joe Manchin has already told us that. I'm guessing that the price tag will start with a 2, not a 3. And of course, the other problem with reconciliation is you can't really write new laws. You have to use existing legislative vehicles and just fund them. You can tweak those things, so that also limits what you can do. Having said that, I'm hoping for a robust set of policy changes to come forward in that bill. And let me just mention a few of them. I'll separate the education and training policies from everything else. I think the education and training policies are very important, again, to improve workers' skills, to help them adapt to the lingering effects of COVID, to baby boomer retirements, and to the new infrastructure jobs. As Donna mentioned, perhaps the single biggest change here, if it's enacted, will be free community college. Now, I'll tell you, and I'll tell you in the next few minutes, that I'm not always as big an enthusiast as some of my co-policy analysts. I'm not a big fan of free community college for everybody. People often don't anticipate the downside. For instance, a lot of people who now go to four-year college would now instead try to start at a community college and transfer. Their outcomes will be worse. They would likely squeeze out the people who really need more community college, unless we specifically invested money in improving the capacity of the community college institutions. But what it looks like is going to happen, which it looks like from the early language coming out of the House of Representatives, is that free community college will be limited to low-income individuals. It will phase out. And I actually think that's a good thing, because these folks really do need it to be free. And I'm looking forward to legislation that does that. Still, what exactly will be free? Will it be limited to associate degree programs or also certificates? If it's included in certificates, will it include only for credit or not for credit? We know a lot of the job training that occurs at community colleges is on the sort of short-term not for credit side. If that's not covered by free community colleges, it might need to be covered by something else, like expansions of Pell grants to cover more short-term programs, which I generally think would be a good thing. Separate, and I'll say also here as well, I don't believe every worker should get education and training. I don't think every worker is in position to benefit from education and training. Some people, because they simply don't have the skill base to be very trainable. Other people, because their family obligations, the need to provide income, makes it very hard. And of course, as Donna suggested, if they had some other sorts of cash, maybe that would free them up a little bit. But I do think a broad expansion of workforce services is in order. And a lot of people will need some kind of help connecting to the labor market, trying to access those new jobs, some skill building, et cetera. Now, the Biden administration, when it initially rolled out its proposals, they called for $100 billion in new workforce development money over and above free community college. $100 billion over an 8-year period, that's a lot of money in the workforce development world. A lot of it was intended for instance, to scale up these very, very successful small programs. Donna mentioned Project Quest. There are some others, but they remain very small, and scaling them up and maintaining the quality will be challenging. So the money would be going there. Some of it would go to try to build new career pathway programs. So people right now in low-wage jobs may see a pathway to something better. Some of it would go into career and tech ed, work-based learning, et cetera. But let's see what kind of cash gets put on the table. And again, hopefully there will be room for state and local policymakers, program directors from TANF and other programs to figure out how to use that money most effectively. There's other issues. I think as we have more displaced workers in the economy, we will need more of what some people call lifelong learning. And it really might take the states to implement things like that, a little bit of payroll deduction every month that workers can put away for when they need it. I would support that as well. So a lot of interesting possibilities on the education and training side, but then there's all the other stuff. And let me just quickly run through all the other stuff. And then I should stop and open up for conversation. So first of all, what are the first bucket is sort of any of the policies that will provide more cash to working families, low-wage working families, and low-income families. The most obvious version of that is the minimum wage and the push for either a $15 minimum or some others. I do not support a federal $15 minimum. I think that should be based more on state and local characteristics, but that's not going to happen at the federal level anyway, right? The parliamentarian has already determined that minimum wage increases can't be in the reconciliation bill. It's not directly focused on budgets alone. But on the cash side, there are these new tax credits or the expansion of the earned income tax credits, especially to childless adults, where the current credits are very small. I wholeheartedly support that. And very importantly, trying to make permanent the increases in the child tax credit. Now, it is possible, as some economists will say, that making the child tax credit increases permanent, it actually could reduce employment in our families by some amount. I tend to think any reductions will be small, and the benefits to families and especially children will be well worth it. So I think we should definitely do that. By the way, it doesn't have to necessarily go up to families with $150,000 of income. It can definitely be scaled down and should be. But secondly, the bucket of family-friendly policies, and here we're mostly talking about childcare and paid family leave. These are unambiguously good for workers, especially for moms, although they could also be good for dads who want to take advantage of that, and they're good for the families as well. Here, I think childcare unambiguously will raise employment levels. Paid family leave could actually go either way. I could see it increasing employment in some groups, maybe limiting it for others, and yet I still think it's a very important policy that we should implement. The third bucket, Donna mentioned folks with disabilities or other barriers to employment. What can we do to sort of give them more access to jobs? Well, one of the ideas that's gained popularity in recent years is subsidized jobs, publicly subsidized jobs, maybe in the private sector, maybe the public sector, targeted especially on hard to employ regions. The Biden folks recommended $12 billion over an 8-year period. That's about $1.5 billion a year. We've heard less about it recently. I hope there's some money in that. And then finally, what I call the good jobs agenda, not just getting cash in the hands of workers, not just giving them education training, but encouraging employers to improve the quality of the jobs, which sometimes is actually in their interest because it helps them train and retain and attract better workers, more skilled workers with better work performance. And here, I think the Biden administration has embraced that. They have mostly focused on pushing unions, skeptical that that's really going to happen, but there are other ways to push a good job agenda, tax credits for good job employers, technical assistance, et cetera. So like I said at the outset, there are some negatives, there are some costs that we have to be realistic about. I think there will also be some real opportunities at the state and local level, and I hope we all take advantage of that. Thank you.
Wow. Well, thanks. Thank you both. A lot of good information, a lot of things to get our brains working and pondering on, and a lot of uncertainty too, right? What's going to happen? Reconciliation, infrastructure bill, all of that. That, as Donna sort of said, it could really impact TANF. So I'm actually going to ask that bigger question right now, which is, what if? So what if we do get free community college? Let's see what else. I'm going to hold off on the child credit at this point. So what if we get free community college? We get this big infrastructure bill passed, which, a lot of new jobs, but not necessarily in ones where women necessarily have easy access, right? Construction, some of that probably applied manufacturing. So if those things do happen, how should we think about TANF? And also free pre-K and continued broad expansion of childcare. So what is TANF's role then?
I'm happy to start. So I think that it's hard, because we are in this sort of what is it going to look like sort of stage, but I think that what we need to do is to take a step back and look at the whole and think about, I sort of have this map in my sort of mind, right? It's like a lot of moms especially come on to TANF because they're pregnant or right after they have a child. So what will it mean if we have unpaid family leave for those families. And if those families don't need to come on to TANF, does that free up resources that you can use for other things? For states that spend a lot of money right now in childcare and pre-K, will they want to continue that? Or will that free up resources that can go to providing better cash payments? So I think there is a sort of an exercise that I think all TANF agencies should be preparing to go through to think about where are the intersections and where are the gaps. And that I think of TANF as having two sort of critical functions as we go through this exercise. One is filling in gaps and making sure that for people who are not going to be served by the other programs that are coming down, what are the gaps that TANF can fill? But the other is I think TANF also has an enormous role to play in being the connective tissue. I think what we have seen even with the pandemic is that there's so many resources and they're not easy to access. They're not easy to know what is out there. So I think really thinking about a navigator role, about thinking about what are a family's needs, and then what is the best package of resources to actually help them meet those needs. And I think TANF is just in a unique position because it is smaller, because there is sort of the one-on-one interaction with case managers to really help people take advantage and maximize the use of those resources. So I think, again, I do think there is this resource issue about what's the best use of the resources, but I think there is also about, there's so many times that people come to the TANF agency and the TANF agency doesn't have the resources. And will there be more resources so they can do more to link families with resources that will really help make their situations better? So that's sort of my thoughts on the links there.
Thanks. How are you?
So again, I'll just focus more specifically on the work part, and this is close to Donna's second role that she mentioned for TANF as a navigator of a source of improving access. I think TANF dollars, some chunk of them, should be focused on not only how do we improve the access of low-income workers, disadvantaged workers to jobs, but not just the most immediately available jobs. Again, loosening up, as Donna suggested earlier, loosening up a little bit on this kind of obsession with work first and getting everybody in quickly, because sometimes taking a little longer might really enable people to get better jobs than that first one. It might take a little bit of time for education and training, but helping them access the best jobs they could possibly get within a reasonable time period. There's all kinds of things that a lot of workers need in this regard. There's a broad range of workforce services. Now, think of some of the things workers get if they ever step foot in a one-stop shop. And it's been very interesting. Of all the evaluations of WIOA and WIA spending in dollars, and some of the evaluations in mixed bag, the services that workers get at one-stops are often the most cost-effective. That little bit of job market information, that little bit of job counseling, maybe helping a worker think about what might make sense about a career pathway, a trajectory for themselves. We so absurdly underfund those one-stop centers and that set of services. So frankly, TANF at the state level could step in and play much more of that role, either directly or at least making sure that workers have the access to that kind of information that supports. And then in all other areas, if the feds don't provide the subsidized jobs that some workers need, or as much of the child care that they need, these are other places, again, where TANF can plug those holes and provide supports that may not fully be available. But I do think of that. How can TANF help people access not just any job, but a reasonably good job, a better job, and maybe helping people figure out if in fact some programs in community college are free, making sure that disadvantaged folks, people of color, who for various reasons don't access those programs as much as we would like to see them, how can TANF help them get to the table, maybe get additional skills, as well as new jobs.
Thank you. Damon, I think you had a question.
Yeah, Harry and Donna, we got a question. What is the mood of Congress at this point to make structural changes to TANF? We all get the need. Do they, meaning Congress? And just to add a little bit onto that, if you feel that there's no hunger right now, what can TANF programs do to make their case, to make the case of their importance in the safety net, make their importance as that glue, like Donna said, but also the case that this is a truly beneficial investment to our local community, so that in turn, they could hopefully get more dollars to provide more targeted assistance?
So I'll start. I think there's very little appetite in Congress for doing anything to TANF. I think hopefully what we'll see is that by the end of the month, we will have a continuing resolution and TANF will be extended in that just as it is. And I think that when I think about what states can do, I think there are a number of things. One is, I do think there is a narrative question. This goes back to my point about changing the narrative. Part of why TANF is so hard to change is that there isn't agreement on what TANF does or should do. And I sort of created sort of a narrative that is very much, we need to change TANF. And we need to sort of think about that in a anti-racist lens. But there's a lot of people who would not agree with me on that and wouldn't agree, I think, with states that sort of may share that. So I think that's really sort of trying to create that new narrative. Like there are concerns that you can't give cash to people because they're going to spend it on bad things. And the more we have evidence that people spend their cash on basic needs, the more you can begin to change that. So I think there is a research agenda. But I think if we think back to how TANF was created because of sort of state changes. And certainly not all of those changes, I think, were necessarily changes that have borne out to be good changes, but they were what people believed at the time would make the most difference. And so I think there is an opportunity because states have incredible flexibility. I think there is incredible opportunity for states to create a new narrative about what is needed for families and what TANF can do. But I think it will be required for states to be bold and to use the flexibility they can to really do what they do differently.
I think Donna's right that I see very little appetite for major structural changes in the program. In terms of the narrative, here's how I think about the narrative. One can say there's sort of two reasons to spend money on programs for poor people. One is a moral reason to help the people who need it the most, to relieve suffering. The second is a more practical. It's an investment. It's an investment in the skills of some people, the access to work for others, and those investments are not only good for those workers, it's good for employers in many cases, good for the economy. And I think this narrative could be strengthened. Employers, as their baby boomers are retiring, and especially in these sectors where there's going to be rising demand associated with infrastructure, they're going to have trouble finding these workers that they need. TANF spending sensibly on helping workers get new skills as well as better jobs. I think that's something employers can get behind. Now, again, sometimes employers immediately want trained workers for what they need right now. That's not necessarily the government's job to provide that. But again, framed in a sensible way, in a way that helps both workers and employers, that makes sense. And it's also good for the future of the economy, not just for having more skilled workers and experienced workers. We know from a lot of research that when kids are growing up in households with a lot of income insecurity, that reduces their long-term productivity. There's a lot of recent research on what people call toxic stress. What could be more toxic and stressful for kids when their family runs out of money or runs out of food stamps at the end of the month or something like that. So I think framing this as a sensible investment for workers, for employers, and for the productive needs of the economy may a little bit start to change the perceptions of what that program does.
And Harry, can I follow up a little bit on that then? So as we look about, you talked about some of the changes in the economy and the opportunities for remote work, and then we're looking at, some infrastructure bills that will create new demand. How does the TANF agency tap into that opportunity? How do they even know in sort of real time where they should offer training or direct their participants or create partnerships?
Well, first, I think folks in the TANF agencies need to follow labor market information at the state and regional level. Some labor market information comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. A lot of states are doing some really, really innovative things to improve the quality of the real-time data. And again, we don't want people just focusing on what's in demand right now, but also with a little bit of an eye towards what's coming down the road. So I think raising the awareness of labor market demand in state and local TANF offices would be a good thing. Secondly, it's a cliche, but one size really doesn't fit all. And there are workers who can do significantly better than they've done in the past with the right supports. There are some workers, as Donna said, with disabilities that are going to be harder to employ, and they might need more subsidized jobs. So it's really having a clearer sense of what's there on the demand side of the market in our region or state, looking at people, and for this, you really need individual level assessment. The quality of assessment is very important to help, and then help identify which workers can really benefit from some additional education and training, which need childcare or transportation, and which may not do better, but maybe a subsidized job would be good. So I would think those two areas are where both state and local TANF directors could really do the most good.
I think there's a danger too that TANF agencies will need to push against, and that is because there is nothing proposed that is TANF specific. There is, I think, a danger that they will not be at the decision-making table about how resources get allocated, what sort of decisions get made. And I think it's critical that they are at the table, because I think they are the agencies that can make the voices heard of people who have a significant set of needs. But I think that it also is a way to build those connections and to make sure that TANF recipients are not left out. So I think that there just is a role to play in being good, both advocates and consumers of what is going to happen, and making sure that, again, the TANF is not left out just because there's nothing that specifically says TANF in the legislation.
And Don, is this particularly on a WIOA type table?
I don't think it's just WIOA. I think there will be lots of sort of things happening. And what is hard, I think, but also unique for TANF is that they will need to understand all of those pieces, right? So, you can't sort of be thinking about childcare without be thinking about TANF, both because of the resources that go into childcare and pre-K, but also because of the needs of families who are on TANF. So I think it is the WIOA stuff, but I think it's also sort of the other pieces as well. Community college may not always be connected with the WIOA stuff. And so I think that just sort of thinking about what are the conversations that are happening, and how do you be a voice for people whose needs may be different, and making sure that those needs are met. I would also say one other thing I do think there is an implication for training of staff and producing resources. So I don't think that, I think that there is, I think there just is movement about thinking about job placement, and how do you move out of the mindset that we've been in, that is just take the first job that comes along. So sort of what Harry said of taking, sort of a longer time. But I just read a report recently on experience-based progression, which basically makes the case that a lot of people who are in low-wage jobs have experience that, if you think about it properly and package it properly, they're eligible for jobs that really have an upward trajectory. And so for people who don't want to go to school, it's like, what are those jobs? And how do you make sure people are thinking in that way? and understand that. So I think there's a lot of sort of new skills, new information, and new partnerships that will really make a difference for, sort of ending up with better employment outcomes for TANF recipients.
And how would you respond, Donna, to, and Harry as well, the notion that, well, the work requirement is an impediment to states to allow more education and training, or move away from a work first approach, because we are going to be, as you said, likely operating within the current construct of TANF. How would you respond to those states? Because that's what we hear a lot. It's all about the work requirement.
Right. So this is something I have thought a lot about. I have just written a paper on that sort of addresses some of this, and it's what the next session for anybody who's interested on moving TANF and work programs in an anti-racist direction. So the reality is that the states it is a requirement that states need to meet the work participation rate, right? But most of the states have a zero target rate, or they have a very low target rate. And the majority of their, whatever they have for their rate that they do meet, comes from work, from paid work. So states have all the flexibility they need to actually operate different programs right now. And so it's really sort of getting out and decoupling what you're doing for a work program from the work participation rate requirement. Those are two different things. You have to believe that you have to take the flexibility that the law has given and use it. And the work participation rate is just not the issue that it has always been. And I think a lot of states are on autopilot. So they created their work programs so that they respond to the work participation rate. And it's what I said, we're in a different time right now. You don't have to. Caseloads are so low. States have so much credit from their caseloads being low that they just can create a different kind of work program. And they need to just be bold and take the flexibility they have and use it. And it is completely not flaunting the law. It is completely within the law. The flexibility was a key part of the law. I'm going to stop there now because I could talk about this all day.
I agree with that. Now, I defer. Donna knows much more about the TANF program currently than I do. But where the flexibility is there, and a lot of it is there, I think states can make better use of it. Again, it goes back to this issue of really doing careful assessments of different families who are participating. Some can simply do better in the labor market with the right supports or with a bit of training, helping those people get that. Others, like I said, maybe a little bit of support would help them more regularly attach to the labor market, even if it is a low wage job. And as I said, hoping things like minimum wages and earned income tax credits boost the earnings associated with that. And let's be realistic, for some folks who are going to have real trouble, meeting what we usually think of as a private sector job and thinking about what alternatives, and all of those things could be consistent with existing work requirements. Just requires local offices to do a little more work, a little more creativity maybe on the front end.
One question just came in, had to do with the assessments, like you just said, Harry. Do you have any insights, any recommendations? I know, Donna, you've done considerable research around the assessments. How are states training their workers to perform accurate, but more importantly, meaningful assessments? Rather than just collecting all this data, they're actually targeting it and tailoring it to individual needs.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot going on with rethinking assessments, and it's all, I often use when I describe assessments, I sort of feel like what has happened in many TANF agencies is you ask questions about everything about somebody's life, and then you say you go here, and it's the same place you would have said before you ever did the assessment. And so I think that what is happening is doing shorter assessments and really sort of saying, what do I need at the very beginning to help a person set some initial goals, and then using the relationship to build the knowledge. And, somebody sort of mentioned about trauma-informed care. That is very much, I think, a good trauma-informed practice. You don't want to ask questions about aspects of people's life that may re-traumatize them. So I think it's really thinking about assessments in just a much more narrow sense. I don't want to say narrow, not to mean you don't ask a lot, but it's sort of thinking about what do I need to get started to get to know somebody to help them get on a path, and then building that over time. Much more sort of relationship building involved in assessments, much more sort of driven by participants in terms of what their needs are. And I think that, I would just refer people to, I think, Mathematica, Michelle Dare has done sort of quite a bit of work in really helping states to think about how can they both do shorter assessments, but how that can they also do assessments that really help to determine the next step for somebody.
I defer to Donna on that.
Another question came in. It's another policy question with regard to, are there any specific considerations that you would make to Congress with regard to TANF in the WIOA discussions that may be coming up?
I would really want to see more money in WIOA spent on these labor market services, workforce services, career counseling, job counseling, et cetera. Because as I just said, those things are really, really cost effective. They don't cost a lot of money, and it's almost criminal how much we invest, how little we invest right now. So I really would like to see Congress put more money into that. And of course, at the state and local level, cooperation between TANF agencies and local workforce boards to make sure those services are available to everybody who needs them. And again, remember, all these folks who, for all these different reasons, are hard to employ, have a disability of some kind or a past trauma, something that means they're just not going to succeed in that regular labor market, making sure that there is, but we still want them to work, then really don't forget to put some money in subsidized employment. And again, the local workforce boards and the TANF agencies could then think how best to use those dollars.
I know we're running short on time, but this is for both of you. Question came in, if you've done any research or come across any research or had any discussions related to current core versus non-core activities and how they may be exacerbating structural racism.
So this goes back to my point about sort of the very strong focus on work first. So I think it's sort of not only the core, non-core, it's the design of even the activities within core and non-core. So if you think about just the constraints on job search, that you don't really, it's the construct isn't designed to have people wait for a good job to come along. It's designed to get them into a job quickly. So even within sort of core, I think you have things that that really sort of exacerbate racism. So we just did this synthesis of more recent studies looking at what are employment outcomes for TANF recipients. We did it earlier this year. And if you look at those studies, basically what you see is everybody is going into low wage jobs and they're in very unstable jobs. And so you just see this cycle sort of continuing. That's where they came from when they came onto TANF, and they're going back into those jobs. So the whole construct, I think, is really focused on, is not sort of focused on how do we break that cycle? How do we really think about this as a way to create a different trajectory for people and opportunity? So I do think the core and non-core does exacerbate structural racism. But I would go back to my point I made before, which is that you need to think about core and non-core if you're focused on meeting the work participation rate, but you do not need to design your work program focused on core and non-core, because if you think of those, decouple them, there's meet this rate is one thing, provide work programs is another. And I think you have to think about it that way to be able to really sort of begin to move in an anti-racist direction, because as long as the work participation rate is what drives the design of programs, you will in fact be reinforcing racist ideas and reinforcing occupational segregation and all of the things that we'd like to really sort of change.
Again, I defer to Donna on those specifics of TANF programs on the ground.
And I guess, Harry, I'll ask you this one. This one's always close to my heart. I love labor economists, even though I'm a political scientist.
Thank you.
We're seeing the COVID, the loss of jobs with regard to COVID. We see automation. One thing that's always been interesting to me is the stratification of the labor force, where most of the middle skill jobs are either going up or going down. And now we have the bottom, I hate calling it the bottom, but the bottom fighting what used to be the middle, but what's left of those middle skill jobs. What insights do you have on how TANF programs can compare a person who may not have a bachelor's or an advanced degree or something like that, who will now be competing with someone who lost their higher income job or something, and now they're competing for that what's now the middle skill job?
Well, I wrote a paper a number of years ago called A Tale of Two Middles, because on the one hand, you have economists saying middle paying jobs really seem to be shrinking, which is a very discouraging finding. On the other hand, you keep hearing from employers that have those middle skill jobs, we can't find the workers. Both can be true. The middle has changed a lot. The middle used to be good paying production, assembly line jobs, good paying clerical jobs for people coming out of high school, not even necessarily with a high school diploma. Those have largely disappeared from the middle. And now to make it into the middle, you often need some general skill, some kind of post-secondary credential, or a specific occupational skill. And that's what makes a lot of those middle skill jobs harder to fill. And they will get increasingly harder to fill as baby boomers retire, and also as the federal government pours money into infrastructure jobs. So that's the issue. We, as much as possible, we want to help workers meet the needs that employers can't fill right now in some of those good paying jobs. And again, if some modest amount of schooling or training can help workers get there, we want to make sure they have the access to that kind of training. It's good for everybody for them to have more. And sometimes the jobs don't even sound that skilled. Think of long haul trucking, right? Which has long been a job. And yet first of all, there are skill needs in that to handle a really large rig. There are the difficulties of, scheduling, being away from family and home several nights out of the year. It's really important to make sure these drivers don't have substance problems, et cetera. So some of these jobs are not necessarily high skilled jobs, but they do require some very specific employee characteristics. And again, TANF agencies can be a little more creative coming out of their assessments about which of their potential people on their caseload might be able to meet those needs, work more jointly with the local workforce boards, the one-stop shops, et cetera. And let's see how many of these people who already have mastered the low-wage labor market and have pretty regular participation, but stuck on a low rung of that ladder. And let's see if we can bump them up. But it's having the right idea of what constitutes the middle today, which is something quite different than it was 10, 20 years ago.
Great. Thank
Harry,
you.
I have a question, and I've read this as well, that the issue that many people are now part of the long-term unemployed by virtue of the fact they did not work during the pandemic. And employers typically have sort of a bias against those individuals because they've been out of the labor market a long time. But is there any shift happening in that regard? Because employers need employees, and a lot of people were in this situation. Is there a way? And if employers' perspectives aren't changing, how do we better position those long-term unemployed to actually become employed again?
Well, so I think it's a really important question because, pre-COVID, we had a pretty tight labor market, and all of a sudden, again, one of the best things you can do for low-wage workers is have a tight labor market, because if employers can't meet their need for workers with the existing set of procedures and rules, they have some incentive to update them. And by the way, and as that tight labor market lasted a number of years in the last recovery period till early 2020, a lot of workers who had been on the sidelines were really coming back in. People who had been out of the labor market for a number of years, since the Great Recession, were coming back in. And a lot of people, worried this would drive inflation up, and those workers simply don't exist. And month after month, they were proven wrong, because there was entry back into the labor market, and real tightness does that. And take an example from employers. We all know one of the first aspects of structural racism is this proliferation of people with criminal records, and the usual negative employer reaction to having those criminal reactions, even sometimes when, and there's sometimes when those negative reactions are justified, as many times when they're not, right? If somebody has one nonviolent felony conviction on their record, and they haven't recidivated in, 8 or 10 years, they pose no greater risk to employers than any other worker, right? But I think there's starting to be some understanding of that, and there are a number of large employers leading the way, saying it might be you employers, it might actually be in your interest to open that door a little wider. You might find some real talent, that's the word that's often used in these discussions, among people whom you're dismissing at the outset. So there can be some flexibility there, and the tightness, the more tightness we get, the better it is. And again, employers may not dream this up on their own. They might need some technical assistance, some tax credits to help them make a shift, to have to use a wider lens. A lot of these folks, and again, the tightness will come partially from labor market recovery from COVID, partly from baby boomer retirements, partly from this new work and infrastructure and green jobs, et cetera. But it does create an opportunity to get people in who have been traditionally excluded from anything other than the really lowest rung on the ladder.
And Donna, do you have thoughts about how TANF can help some long-term unemployed who come on our rolls?
No, but I do think that, I think that we do have to change sort of employer practices. So I think that, whether that's the workforce system, whether TANF is a part of that, I think unless we begin to really sort of create differences in employers, we're always going to have sort of the struggles of getting people who have significant barriers into the labor market. And so I do think that, I agree with Harry. I mean, the best solution is a tight labor market. Mm-hmm. Because then, it sort of feels to me, then what happens is that people who employers wouldn't generally hire get hired. And then that in and of itself can begin to change sort of people's perceptions about what matters and what doesn't.
But also, that's all correct. But employers are only going to make the changes that they think are in their interests, unless they're compelled by a higher minimum wage or something like that. So there's an important public role, and maybe more at the state and local level than the federal, of working with these employers having difficulties right now, and saying, there are these pools of workers who until today you have left out. But to get that change, it really has to be more of a cooperative effort, and again, maybe coming from the local workforce boards, et cetera, but to help them see that their interests can be served by doing things a little differently.
So we are just a few minutes out. So first of all, do you have other things you'd like to say that you haven't yet? And then also, we were talking mostly to TANF administrators, but a lot of the decisions, right, are at the commissioner or the governor, or even the state legislature level about how resources are allocated, and even things around the work requirement and work participation rate. So I'm sort of thinking, what messages would you have for others who are making decisions in the state beyond the TANF administrators?
Well, I do think there are a need for a lot of policy changes at the state level, but I think that TANF administrators are going to have to play a pretty significant role in making the case for why those changes are needed. And I also think it's important to think about, I sort of think that I want to sort of put the big sort of sign that says why in every TANF office, and have sort of every TANF office go through an exercise for everything they do and answer the question of why they do it. And is it that they do it because it is a legislative mandate? Is it they do it because they have always done it that way? Is it they do it that way because the computer system does it that way? Just to have people begin to think about where are the opportunities for change. And some are going to require legislation and some are not. But I think that I always think about this, you find sort of the low-hanging fruit of things that you can do, and then you make the case, for why those changes matter, and then make the case for bigger changes. So I think, I don't want it to sound like I think all this is easy. I think it is hard work, but I think it is necessary work.
And I like that framing. And, you would like to see more TANF administrators being focused less on checking a box and meeting. I don't want to demean anybody's efforts. I know people work very hard to make the system work as best as they can. But again, thinking, with existing legal structures and existing funding, exactly what do we want to accomplish? How can we serve the needs of very diverse populations who will need very different things, but also of local employers having difficulty finding folks, and even of local economies, and not just instantly, but maybe allowing for a little bit of patience. And I think that's very similar to Donna's framing. With that in mind, people might be able to make some positive changes that they haven't done till yet.
Thank you. And as I said at the beginning, the changes that occurred in practice and service delivery and policies because of COVID, it happened quickly, right? It also showed that change is possible. And so I think, and it also demonstrated that there's a lot of innovation and creativity. So, I think it's possible to have these conversations, to make some of these changes, I think Donna's sort of notion of disconnecting the work requirement from what you actually do. And a lot of that has to do with what's communicated at the front line as well. But I think there's some real opportunity there. We're pretty much at the end, unless anyone has a last question or comment. I think this has been a great setup, if you will, for the remainder of the conference as folks think about all the various topics and innovations and practices are going to be shared, and how do we take this, make this a pivotal time, a time to pivot, and really make the changes that can be made within the existing system, and really help our families, and combine it with what may be a lot of new resources to really help families, and be part of that. As Donna said, get to the table. And you know what I found with TANF and the experience at WIOA, you can't wait to be invited. You got to crash the party, and get yourself to the table and elbow your way in, and make yourself a presence. So Harry and Donna, thank you so much. As ever, it was a great conversation. And I know you spurred a lot of good thinking, and I hope you all have a good rest of the afternoon. And Harry and Donna, you're certainly welcome to join any of the sessions we have this week. So thank you all. And thank you everyone for listening to this opening session.
Thank you.
Thank you.